Boardroom Bound, episode 136, Why Quality Leadership is More Impactful Than You Think, with Bonnie Hagemann.
And so, some of the things that I think are crucial, obviously relative experience. If you're on a board of an energy company and you can't relate to what they're talking about, that's not helpful.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Boardroom Bound. My name is Alexander Lowry, and this is the podcast dedicated to intentional leadership in the boardroom. My goal is to give aspiring and existing directors the tips, tactics, and strategies necessary to transform your confidence and build a successful career as a board director. Quick reminder, you can get all of today's show notes at podcast.gordon.edu. And in today's show, we're speaking with Bonnie Hagemann. Bonnie is someone who is an experienced board director and has taken many of the certifications and trainings, and from that launched a forum for other people to get onto boards. So she is the co-founder of Women Exec on Boards and launched that after taking Harvard's course on women getting on boards, and now helps other people within her circle to land board seats. She jokes that her hobby is helping people get jobs. I think that makes her very popular. And what we do is we talk about a wide-ranging set of topics today about what it means to get onto a board, to network to be on a board, how to be successful on a board, with a lot of fun stories along the way.
Before we jump into today's show, I'd like to share a message from our sponsor about director certification. Want to join your first board, or are you looking for additional board seat opportunities? In either scenario, be sure to be disciplined in your approach. Now, through the Becoming an Exceptional Board Director Candidate Coaching and Certification course, you get both modern board director candidate packaging and modern board operations knowledge integrated within one program. Remember, the key to landing additional or your first board seat is in your packaging. Make the effort to do it right. Program graduates also receive their globally recognized International Board Director Competency Designation upon course completion. It's designed for individuals and groups. You can learn more at bit.ly/IBDC-D. That's bit.ly, bit.ly/IBCDC-D. And now let's jump into the show.
Bonnie Hagemann, welcome to the Boardroom Bound podcast.
Thank you, Alexander. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I am thrilled because this is just another example of how worlds collide. It's a small world after all. And Maria Garcia Nelson was on and did a wonderful show. And when she and I were talking afterwards, she said, well, you must meet my dear friend Bonnie. She and I work on this organization together, and we're helping propel all these women forward. And I know that you'd have a lot of fun talking with her. Sure enough, we did. We had a great conversation. Lots of ideas got shared. And one was, well, you must be on the show and talk to other people about it.
Correct. Yes, I'm excited about that, and I appreciate Maria giving you the heads up to talk to me as well.
And just for context, so just everybody can picture it today, if you could give an overview of your career, where you got today and where you're focused, and then we'll do some of the deeper dive into that organization you and Maria co-founded.
Yes, happy to do it. Well, I run two companies. So I have Executive Development Associates, which is a boutique consulting firm for the top of the house, leadership strategy, C-suite coaching, succession planning, high potential development, and we do some board work as well. And that company was founded in the early 80s by Jim Bolt. He came from Xerox. And what we do there is we tie all executive development to the strategy of the organization. So our hope is that we always help advance the company strategy as we're helping advance their leaders. And we do research in that area as well, which is trends in executive development. And I took over that company in 2007. I actually had another consulting firm before that I started in 2001. And most people can relate to this one. Before I started running consulting firms in 2001, I worked for CPP, the publisher of the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. So many people have taken that assessment, and they recognize that, and I worked for them, which was a great part of my career. But then I started running the consulting firms, and then in 2012, we started building technology for our space, and today I run an early-stage technology company as well, which the two companies are very symbiotic. And the early stage technology company is called SurveySaurus. And our vision is to make culture visible to the leaders, the board, and investors such as private equity and venture capital investors. And we do that by being the one-stop shop for HR and leadership development surveys. And so all of that work had led me to doing significant work with boards, which is how I became interested in being a board member myself for a publicly traded company.
So a good aspiration, and we can see how it will build on your past experience. And the story is a big part of it for a lot of people, of how they got there and what they can talk about it. And, knowing that, and I wonder where that was in the context you decided, I would like to do the board work, because you've got some past experience with a nonprofit being a board member. You're the board chair. Clearly, you're the board chair at SurveySaurus. And at some point along the way, I think probably the light bulb, as it does for most of us, probably went on and go, I should do more of this, which probably led you to take the class at Harvard. Can you talk us through that process?
Yeah, so I am on, just, backing up on, I'm on a large nonprofit board out of Mexico, which is, they have, faith-based organization with university and all of that. So I do have experience on boards. And then, like you said, I'm on my own board, and I've been on a couple of others. But when I started doing the work, I do C-suite coaching myself. I've helped seat several CEOs as they came on, and then help them, stay with them as they get seated for the next 6 months to a year, doing a lot of leadership strategy work. And I've also worked with a lot of succession issues at the top of the house. And all of that leads you to have to deal with the board quite a bit. Mm-hmm. And so in some of those board meetings, I started to think it would be really helpful to me, just in the work that I do, to sit on the other side of one board, and then, to sit at the table. And then as I began to study that, I thought, this is really interesting work, and I would like to do this now. And I want to have one publicly traded board seat, during my career, as I'm still running hard as I am. Right. But, then later, when I start to cut back on the things I'm doing under my regular work, I would like to take on another one or two. And so it really just was being inside those boardrooms and seeing what went on that made me want to be at the table.
And so you clearly have a path and a trajectory of taking the experience you have now, parlaying that into a public company board role, which for some people is checking a very important box, because once you've had that, you can do any role, some people feel. And it sounds like, if I interpret it correctly, you've got a vision beyond that at whatever time period to say a portfolio of board positions, perhaps being a professional board member. Is that the way to think about it?
Well, and I would never say that that's all I'm going to do, because I love the work that I do, and I'm sure I'll never stop. I always say my career, my retirement plan is to, if I can't speak, coach, write, and lead companies, then I'll just write. All of the stuff that I do, I enjoy, so board work is just part of that. But I feel like it is an important part of where I want to go. And I've always been the kind of person who's had the 20, 30, 40-year plan. I don't have just the next couple of years planned out.
Well, I'll say I'm working on my life plan now, because I love that, the long-term plan, because that should drive everything you do, right? If you've got the long-term goals and figured out. Yeah. And I imagine for some of our listeners who are just beginning to think, I'd like to get a board role, they probably haven't gotten up to that, let's call it the 300,000-foot view of not just the one role, but what does it look like beyond that? And maybe that's hard to do, Bonnie. I'd love your thoughts until you've had a first board role, whether you're working, say, at a large nonprofit or a private company. I guess until you really experience it, you can't know whether you want more of those. Would you agree?
Well, I think that's true. You want to, get involved enough to understand what you're asking for. And so, personally, I'm big into education, of course. And so as soon, not only have I been educating myself for publicly traded company board roles, I started educating myself when I was on a nonprofit. So I started taking classes then. And so I would do both. I would get on the smaller and the nonprofit boards to start with as a recommendation. And then I also just recommend get yourself educated. And that's what led me to, I'm educated through both the National Association of Corporate Directors and through Harvard. and which is one of the things I know you want to talk about. So I'm a fellow with the NACD, which just means, that I keep taking classes and keeping my credentials up to date. And I think that they're a great education institution. And then I went through because of my colleagues, I had told them that I was looking for a board seat. And when the Harvard Women on Boards program, executive education program came out, the very first one in 2016, I immediately received 2 emails from people that I knew. And they both said, "This is for you." And I honestly had not been thinking about taking any courses in Harvard Exec Ed. And so, but when you get the same thing twice in a row, you think, I should pay attention. So I did. So I ended up getting accepted into that education program, and I showed up there, which is where I met Maria, my co-president for the Women Execs on Boards at Harvard. So I'm sorry, let me back up. This is where I met Maria, and we are co-president of Women Execs on Boards, which is a global network of women prepared for board service at Harvard. And when I arrived at that program, I had never been in a program with all women before. In fact, I worked primarily with men. And so that was an unusual experience, but I spent a week with 67 women from 17 countries, and they were phenomenal women, and I was so impressed by them. And so that was the impetus for the network that we have today.
And in some ways, what you did is you took an opportunity presented to you after you'd sort of whetted your appetite and thought, this is interesting, I should learn more. And it sounds like you've been continuing to do that, right? You've picked up some different experiences. You've continued to do different training. And I'm guessing there's a lot of networking going on the side, even though, and Maria was very clear with me on that, because she's so busy. She's not looking for that sort of public company board role now, but she's giving back to the others in this organization. Mm-hmm. But I think that's probably works. It's symbiotic, right? Because you are connecting people, you're educating, learning, you're building your network while you're also giving back to others. And as you said, you've got a plan for a little bit down the road to get towards that board seat. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like that's a good balance that a lot of people should do? Or do you think for most people, okay, if you're ready, you just go guns blazing and go down that path? How do you recommend for people in the group that you work with?
Well, first of all, the group that I work with, we're all extremely busy, but you have sort of phases in your life that are busier. And so while I will be looking for a board seat soon, right now I'm not actively looking, although if something came along that was just the right fit, I certainly would pursue it. Mm-hmm. But I'm not actively looking, and the reason is because we're raising capital for the technology company, and that's a full-time job. So I can't really add on to that, but I am always happy to help the network members to, try to find the right board seats. And so I think it is, we'll come back around. And it's always easier for me to tell you how great Maria is for your board than it is for me to tell you how great I am for your board. And so it helps when you have a network of people. So I encourage people to do both, like help other people get on there and pursue it. But there certainly are phases when you have to step back and say, now's not the time. Because once you get one of these paid board seats, you want to deliver.
True.
And so you don't want to be, too busy.
So, Bonnie, let's go back to that point you just made about recommending someone that you know, which is basically what a network is. And help us understand that for our audience, because we probably hear the statistics. Some people would say maybe 2/3 of board seats are filled through that word of mouth, personal connection and network you have, or second degree at most. And for a lot of people who probably went through that Harvard class with you thinking, great, I want to go down this, I need to do it. How do I take that forward? Whether you're male or female, whatever your background is, you're not going to want to do it alone. You need to do it smartly. And how do you sort of educate that group that you're working with? How do we help each other? Is it as simple as, okay, we all know this is what we want to do, and it's not just a board role because that's far too broad. It's like, this is the type of board, this is the skill set I bring, this is what I need. Is there more to it than that? Help our audience imagine how they would help advocate for themselves.
Well, absolutely. So I'll tell you what we do in our network, and then, the audience can adjust based on what they have access to. But when we spent a couple of years just having phone calls to try to create continuity after that class. And so we would have like open meetings where we had continuing education, so basically, and trying to learn to help each other, do our board bios, talk to recruiters, all of that stuff. But, in my experience, what I see when I'm working with boards is it hardly ever, the board seat hardly ever gets filled directly from the recruiter. Mm-hmm. It's almost always a conversation that the board has. They say, who would be good? Someone on the board talks to them, has lunch, and the next thing you know, then they get referred to the recruiter for vetting. That's more often than not how it happens. And so we knew we needed to get to where we were having the conversations with the people who were sitting at the table. And we weren't progressing fast enough, which is why my co-founder was actually Lisa Pent, and she was the one who kept us together after the class. And that is why we founded the network, was because we felt like we had to do more. And so the formal network we formed, we have an annual retreat, we have continuing education calls, but we're even getting much, much more organized than that, to where we're in small groups, where we're learning about each other, and we're telling others, like, if you are looking for Harvard-prepared, women who are ready to be on boards, who are already at a high level, then, this is the place to look. So that's one thing. We're doing some PR. We also, when one of us hears about a board seat, we share it with the whole network. Mm-hmm. And we don't, I may want the board seat myself, but I'm not keeping it to myself. We're committed to help this network. And I'll be just as happy if one of them gets it, because I know it's coming back around. And so I'll just give you an example. We had a woman in, I think it was Turkey, and she wanted to interview for a position that was open. And so this was a C-suite position in an organization, which we try to help with those too, because often that helps you get on the board to have had that C-suite experience.
Definitely.
And so she wanted to get access to this C-suite position and get an interview, and it took us all of 5 minutes through our WhatsApp chat to get her to the CEO of that company. Because it's a connected group of women, which is one of the whole reason I got the idea and went to Lisa about starting the formal network was I took a database of all these women, and I just started putting their picture, their job title, where they lived, all of that. And by the time I finished, it took a couple of hours. And I thought, oh my goodness, if we brought this group together, there's no telling what we could do. And so that's where it all came from. And we are starting to make quite a bit of progress getting the women on boards.
And I think it's easy for everyone to extrapolate for themselves. And we use LinkedIn as the analogy because it's so simple and powerful, right?
Yes.
There's a reason LinkedIn is 3 degrees of connection. That's a limit, because past that, no one knows who you are and they can't vouch for you. First, second degree, incredibly powerful. In a sense, you've done your LinkedIn. You've got this circle within LinkedIn where you all know each other. And of course, it exponentially grows because everyone has their own LinkedIn network. Within that, you will hear about opportunities to be connected with each other, and you're all advocating for each other. I don't care how big your network is. If they don't know what you want and the value you would bring to a board role, they can't help you.
That's true.
And you position that for yourself. And if someone is sort of listening, going, you're right, I need to go find that group. I need to connect in. I need to start sharing that story. What are the best practices that you found about how beginning to educate the people around you that are close to you?
Well, so 2 things. One is, let me just back up and say a little something about what you were saying about LinkedIn. So you one of your interviews was with Mike Lorelli, who used to be president of PepsiCo.
Pepsi,
is that correct?
That's right.
Right. And so I went to look at his LinkedIn, and he was connected to 2 of my network members. So that's exactly what you're saying. Like, it doesn't take long to get really connected to the right people if you're paying attention and actively doing it. So I am a huge LinkedIn fan, and I actively pursue the right connections through there. But also, one of the biggest things you can do is just tell every single person that you know that you're looking for a board seat. Because, someone might be married to a person who has access to boards. Someone may be sitting on a board that has an opening coming up. You just never know.
That's right. And Mike actually talks about that on his episode. He said, you're going to make the list of whatever 50 people, let's say 50 people that you're going to call and do outreach to that maybe you haven't talked to and spoken to in many years. And you're going to take 5 minutes of their time and say, we worked together in these projects and I really respected you and I believe you respected me. You know, my skill set and expertise is in area XYZ. I am now looking for board seats on ABC types of opportunities. And if you know of any, if you could keep me in mind, I would appreciate that. And Mike's take was they are always going to remember that call because you don't get very many of them. And assuming they respect you, they will keep that in mind. Worst comes to worst, they can't help you, but you got to catch up with someone who I haven't spoken to in a long time. No one's going to be unhappy about it.
That's it, exactly. I mean, just networking with people. And there's a woman here in Kansas City, and she has a company. Her company's called Coffee Lunch Coffee. And she teaches about how to network, and she's really the best at it. Like, she's connected me with so many people here in Kansas City. But also, it just teaches, the way to do it. Like, I went to lunch with her. Her name's Alana Mueller, by the way. But I went to lunch with her. We sit down, we chat for a bit about family and all of that, and then she says, well, what are you working on? And so I tell her, she said, what are some things you need? I give her a couple of things, and then she's taking notes, and I say, what can I do in return? She gives me a couple of things, and within a couple of days, we followed up on those. And that is great networking. It's like, the get to know each other a little more, ask, and give back. And follow up on that. Don't just leave it hanging. And then, that helps with the board seat or anything else.
It's interesting. Betsy Atkins was on the show, and the statistic is something. She is the second most experienced female director in the United States. And she was talking about in her experience how she calls it pay it forward, but I sort of like how you said it's going to circle back to you in some ways. Her view is like, I'm just going to put it out there and share into the universe and know that it's going to do a lot of good. And the way that I tend to think about it is just in the same way, I'm always having conversations, networking with people. What do you need? How can I help you? What are you trying to do? I will probably know someone that I can connect you with around it. And sometimes you get like-minded people coming back. Sometimes you don't. But my view is let's make it a small world, right? Everyone out there has a need that they're trying to fill. And if you have the right person you can bring them, they're thrilled for you. That's a wonderful thing.
Right. That's it. I've always made it my hobby to help people get jobs. For one, because, we want people working, and if they're looking, and we want them to be happy. But also, that comes back around. There may be a day when I need to find a position or am trying to, a board seat. And so I like that, and I like what Betsy said, which, by the way, I get to meet Betsy in October at one of my network members' homes.
Wonderful.
We're having a get-together.
She's a blast.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
And it's one of those things where I love that you described it. That's your hobby to help people get jobs, because you'd be a very popular person. I'm sure everyone on the show is going to want to follow up with you after that. We should be careful about giving you your email.
That's what's behind it.
But at the end of the day, being on a board is just a level above that, right? Because when you're on a board, you are solving people's problems on different levels. So there's company strategy, you're connecting people. So that's a great mindset to bring. And I imagine from all of those various people from your Harvard class where you've connected with a network, you've probably seen some of the things that you think are, oh gosh, these are the handful of best practices that we've seen again and again work. Here's a couple things people have tried, which I would actually steer people away from. I'd love to hear a couple of nuggets from you from what you've seen to say, definitely people should go down doing these things, or maybe these are areas of void that we've seen and we've tried.
Okay, well, that's good, and not really, just from the network, but I would say more from the experience that I've had working with the boards of these publicly traded company CEOs, that I've learned a lot about what makes a good board member and what doesn't. And so, some of the things that I think are crucial, obviously, relative experience. If you're on a board of an energy company and you can't relate to what they're talking about, that's not helpful. So you want relative experience, which should happen in the vetting process. Good critical thinking skills, that ability to drill down and understand like anomalies, things that are not necessarily, there's something wrong, like to be able to pick it up, because it's not always obvious. So you have to have that skill. And then strategic thinking is crucial at that level. And then listening and communicating, these are areas where I think people can really get themselves in trouble. So you want to be a great listener, and you want to contribute. In their effort to contribute, I've seen board members try to dominate. And in a way that it becomes a problem. The other board members don't enjoy working with them. I'm always surprised at what they'll say to me one-on-one that they won't say in the group, even at that high level that they're working at. So you can, I find out a lot of things about, they can't stand that one board member because they try to dominate every conversation. So those things don't work very well. And then another thing is to be able to have healthy debate versus, feeling like you need to win. Mm-hmm. So a healthy debate is one that is able to, hear other people's opinion and give an opposing opinion, but to be able to come to agree upon how we're going to make the decision and then get behind it. So the last thing you need is a board that is coming out in public as not being together.
Right.
And then, of course, you need to be able to face adversity and stand up to it when necessary. Boards, I believe, will be more and more responsible going forward. They will be targeted for lawsuits. But so they have to be able to stand up to adversity both inside the boardroom and out of it. So if you're on a board and you have a culture problem or you have a CEO problem, someone has to start talking. Mm-hmm. And that's probably the hardest thing to get out on the table, or things like that, is to say, do we have a problem here? I think there's something wrong. I think we should consider digging deeper, because once you realize there might be a problem, I can tell you from my experience of both coaching, leadership strategy, and working with the boards, that problem is probably the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
And so good board members are aware and able to stand up and bring that to attention when needed.
I like that. And I'd also love your opinion. We talked a fair bit about the Harvard course that you took, but you also mentioned NACD, National Association of Corporate Directors, and how as a board fellow, you've got that opportunity. We had Peter Gleason on the show, I believe it was episode 24.
Yes.
Fabulous. I don't think there's anything about
Peter.
boards he doesn't know. I would love if you would just give people a little bit of context about what that has meant for you going through the NACD activities and having that as something that helps perhaps your resume to stand out.
Well, going through the NACD, I did it to get I went through the Director of Professionalism course, which is their basic 2-day, learn all the pieces about being on a board. It's a great basic education just to understand, here's all the committees that you would be on. Here's what you need for each of those committees, so you can kind of figure out where you fit the best. And that was also a great class. We had maybe 75 people, and there were 11 publicly traded company CEOs in my class. Mm-hmm. And so this is not junior level. This is great group. And then after that, I have continued. I attend their leadership summit every year, except I can't do this year, again, because of the capital raising. And but it's been fantastic for continuing education. And
their summit conference is incredible. So I'm blessed to be a speaker at it, and they've got something.
Oh, good for you! Congratulations.
Thank you. It's a wonderful partnership working with NACD, and they've got something several thousand directors. Are you talking about the opportunity to network?
It's amazing. It's amazing. So I love going to the summit. And then they have a local group, a regional group, actually. So I belong to the Heartland region. And I go here in Kansas City. We have a really healthy chapter, and what's great is the boards of the big companies all around the city come to this event. So it's a great way to network and get to meet some of the board members here in the city. And then another nice thing I like about NACD is you can attend their meetings in other cities. Mm-hmm. And I was recently invited to attend one of the ones in Utah, and so I probably will go to one of theirs as well, because then you get to know board members in other other regions.
Well, clearly you're doing a lot of the great activities for the networking, but I believe that to get on a board role, you're constantly also growing your opportunity set, your knowledge, your ability to handle different topics. And we were talking about one of the books that you highly recommend is Thomas Bakewell's Claiming Your Place at the Boardroom Table, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yes, always trying to build your skill. And, these courses, every time I go, I am trying to build skill for how I'll be on a board. Like, for example, if they did something, which they did recently here, on cybersecurity. So I wanted to learn about that. When I go to the Leadership Summit, for the last 2 years, the first year I did all comp committee stuff, the second year I did all nominating committee stuff. So that continuing education is crucial. But I actually met Thomas Bakewell, and I heard about his book, and so I got it and I read it. And what I loved about his book is I thought it was extremely practical, but it hit the important board issues that you would probably face, and gave some stories about what that might look like when it plays out in a scenario. And he talks about everything from audit to risk, and how to deal with the financial statements and public company reporting and Sarbanes-Oxley. It's very practical. And so that's what I wanted, because I wanted to really get my hands around practical things. And then he uses some case studies.
Well, if you can make Sarbanes-Oxley practical, I think that's a fabulous book. I haven't seen that one yet. I'll have to look at that one.
All right.
Well, Bonnie, I am so grateful that you were part of the Boardroom Bound podcast today. And I know we talked about it before. You're great at networking and you love connecting with people. And given that your hobby is helping people find jobs, you might regret this, but I'm sure a lot of people would want to be in touch with you after this. What would be the best ways for them to follow what you're doing or to reach out?
Well, thank you for that. And the best way probably is through LinkedIn, but please also feel free to reach out to either of our websites, executivedevelopment.com or surveysaurus.com.
And I'm sure the Surveysaurus one will stick in our brain. I like alliteration. That's great.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I hope so.
We were delighted to have you on the show today, Bonnie. Thank you for sharing your insights and helping all of us to be boardroom bound.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and good luck at the summit.
That's it for this episode of Boardroom Bound. I loved chatting with Bonnie Hagemann. It was great to hear from someone who is an experienced leader in the business world, has had multiple roles at the senior level, led companies, been in boards, talking about her long-term vision and plan. So she has a near-term goal, I will call it, to be on a public company board director, and then a long-term goal after that to be on multiples of those opportunities. And we talk about how in this show you need to have a plan. And it's not just, I want to be a board director. That's like saying, I want to get a job. It's got to be a little more narrow and niche than that. And then she knows exactly what she wants to do after that. You need that sort of plan in order to take it forward and have progress in your own board search. Now, remember to head over to podcast.gordon.edu where you can get links to everything we talked about in today's episode. And please know, the Boardroom Bound team and I are so proud to be your go-to podcast for all things that connect, prepare, and empower you to land a board seat. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss any of the high-quality content we're bringing to you every Wednesday. Thanks for joining me today. I can't wait to share more stories and strategies from brilliant business minds with you again next week. Remember to keep tuning in to be Boardroom Bound.